Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. Today, we have a guest with us today, Zsofia Agnes Nagy. She is a sustainable supply chain expert, a circular economy ambassador, among many other professional roles. She is a supply chain professional and has experience-based knowledge to help others find the right solutions and execute sustainability throughout their supply chains. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome her today. So thank you so much, Zsofia, for being here.
Thank you, Madison, for inviting me, and I'm really happy to be here. And I hope all of you who are listening, will enjoy this conversation. We're gonna have you prepared a lot of good questions, so I'm really, I look forward to hearing all of your questions. Really lucky to be here. Thank you.
Of course. So I guess we'll just jump into it. I mean, you definitely have so much expertise on sustainable supply chain. So I'd love to hear your perspective on a few things. So first off, how are you currently transforming supply chain practice to be more sustainable, in your own career and in your own personal life?
For me, it's very simple. I've been working for different companies, either as a consultant or in industry roles before. That at the end of the day, last year when COVID hit, a little bit beforehand, but when COVID hit, especially, I basically wanted to do work more in a freelance way. So I started my own company as such, so I can easier, switch between helping one or the other company that needs help. So from my end, it's more freedom, but also for the companies, it's better that I'm more flexible to help them. And what I do essentially ever since is helping smaller, either startups or small to medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, on the way of setting their supply chain up in a correct way to make it sustainable, or if they have set up, any of their value chains completely in a non-sustainable way, then help them on the journey to close that gap between where they are at the moment and where they should be from a sustainable supply chain perspective. Sometimes it's easy, of course, and sometimes it's not so easy. So, the majority of the companies take it from two different angles, which I'm sure many of our audience are well aware of, either from an innovation perspective, which is equally a huge undertaking for some, but on the other hand, it's important to start the work from the roots up, so bottom up, what you can do, every day from a personal and professional perspective. So we try to tackle it from both ends.
Definitely. That's so amazing to hear. And it's great to see that, you made that shift, during the pandemic. And it's definitely kind of where you see what you see the right thing to be. And I guess going off of that, through your role, where do you see the future of supply chain going? Do you see it transforming, more than ever, or what is your perspective on that?
Absolutely. It wouldn't be, a supply chain if it was not a function that is more than capable of transforming itself from not even one day to another, but really, from hours to hours, let's put it this way. And I think mainly, I would say, based on my experience, this is one of the biggest advantages of working in supply chain, that you can see really amazing transformations, but equally, it's also one of the weaknesses that sometimes we can lose the plot. Let's put it this way, in the middle of a transformation, or even just a smaller step. So getting back to really your question, I think this is one of those opportunities that supply chain didn't have beforehand, and not because we were not capable of the transformation, but the focus in the majority of the companies were not so much on supply chain, but more on commercial side of the business, or even the manufacturing side of the business, given which industry one worked in. So from my side, it's a huge opportunity to well, let's put it this way, to have, many of the weaknesses of the previous approach to supply chain has brought to us during the pandemic. And I'm sure everybody is now more than aware of, due to the many channels that these are shared on, right? So all of the issues around, lack of supply, or just, huge amounts of raw materials, or work in progress, or even packaging materials being stuck at different parts of the supply chain due to the pandemic. And then further issues around, ransomware here and there from an IT perspective, and that impacts, of course, the physical supply of the business. So all of these now are much more in the spotlight, and from our side, whoever works in a supply chain leadership role, or even just any of the professional roles, I think it's really time where we can show what we are capable of, but at the same time, this is also a great opportunity where the weaknesses that we were unable to address because of lack of funding within the companies, or just lack of attention, partially because of the previous setup of businesses and the economy. It was just not possible. That didn't really get enough attention. And at the moment, we really started realizing, as human beings, how many different angles we should consider in our value chains. And I go even beyond supply chain, as we usually speak. And I know that as a young professional, you also have a great understanding of supply chain not being just supply and the moving boxes kind of exercise. But believe me, 20 years ago and 30 years ago, when I started my career, that was a hard sell to anyone. If I wanted to just explain that, supply chain is much more than what you think about, it was not exactly an easy explanation. But I'm so glad even this confirms to me, what tremendous change we have gone through already. And just to conclude here, really, I think it's one of those few years, the next 5 to 10 years, when we will transform all of our value chains 100%. So I look forward to that.
Definitely, there's so much to look forward to, and I can definitely say that a lot of people, within my generation do have a similar mindset to, thinking about circularity from the beginning, moving towards that sustainable practice in not just supply, but, all of the things involved. And I guess that kind of leads me into asking you, I think it's amazing. I talk to people around the world and everyone has a different perspective on this, but I would like to know, where have you seen the most progress towards sustainable practice? Meaning, what industries, or, what steps in the supply chain, or, where have you seen, maybe your clients or people that you work with make the most progress, or, even is it small to medium-sized enterprises versus, larger corporations? Who do you think, and where do you see that leadership coming from currently?
It's a really difficult question to answer, but amazing question, and thank you so much for even bringing this up. I would say, it's a multifold answer as such. The small enterprises and the startup community are really doing an amazing trailblazer job. And they come up with all of those, innovation opportunities and solutions that either the big corporations were just not ready to touch, or they were afraid of the magnitude of the change that it might bring into their world. Of course, the majority of the big companies are much more risk averse than a startup or a SME. So what I see, from an innovation perspective, the small ones are much more flexible, much easier to set up correctly up front and lead with the right values. So of course they have an undoubted and undeniable advantage over the big ones. But I also see, many of the big companies starting to realize that being sustainable and then leading a sustainable supply chain does not equal to increasing your prices or inevitably to work in a less efficient way than what they perceived before, right? So I think that's a fundamental change that started happening during the pandemic, and I'm glad to see that. Of course, leading a huge corporation and and those supply chains require an immense amount of resource and mental awareness to just to simplify that complexity that they have been driving before, right? So that will take time. And I would also say that there, of course, they reside on a bigger amount of innovation money and much more resources than a small company. So we can expect and should expect much more from them to take, in the direction of sustainability. But equally, we need to acknowledge that it's much harder to get there from a super linear and super efficient setup into a efficient but sustainable setup. So I would say, yes, definitely the smaller, more innovative organizations are leading the way at the moment, but they are also being utilized by the bigger corporations by now. And I'm glad to see that, if I just mention some of these inventions, like if you think about just as easy a thing as a Euro pallet or a CHEP pallet that we are using every day in our logistics and supply chain. And I'm deliberately choosing, a simpler example here. And then picking up, a coconut shell-based pallet that wasn't even available 5 years ago, right? As an alternative solution to what we are doing based on wood or plastics, right? That's something that that is remarkable, and the big companies have started picking it up. So from that perspective, the answer is very much a mix. Of course, the small ones leading the way, but I'm glad to see the bigger ones buying in and spending more and more innovation money in the right direction, which will be inevitably something that we need very much.
Yeah.
We have spent so much money on the wrong innovation, let's put it this way, non-sustainable, that it will be sometime, well, we can put that right, but we're going to get there. I have faith that we are marching in the right direction.
Definitely. And I think something important that you brought up is, for larger corporations, they definitely are looking at the profit side of things. And that kind of leads me to ask you, how do you think we can connect sustainability and circularity specifically to profitability to get some of these larger corporations on board in the way that we are seeing startups and smaller enterprises lead the way?
I would say, without overcomplicating the whole story, and that's what I have tried to clarify during the last couple of, years. And for me, it's quite clear that if we just think about, more on the frugal innovation side and how we can take, every step in a value chain, for instance, and then look through the details of how we work, we can easily find, every step of the way, either a material that we are discarding from the process, of course, as we try to, go leaner and leaner from a supply chain perspective, it's getting less and less what we can consider as waste along the process, but still we have enough waste in any of the industrialized processes that we are running, where that waste, what we considered waste beforehand, we need to take a look at how we can make value out of it, right? And how we can turn them into value. Either we design them out as part of the circular economy principles, and we can do that via innovation, or we can take a look at how we can capitalize on that part of our process, right? If we are unable to exchange some part of our process, then who else can find that resource valuable, right? And that's where that sharing economy concept and the closed loop concept can get into, more of that, opening that loop up to others to make sure that the loop itself is closed, but it's open between the partners, right? Those are those sustainable symbiotic or industrial landscapes, right? Where multiple companies are working together, sharing resources, either on the raw material side or on the waste side, or even on the energy or utilities side that they are using, right? So I can also mention, some of the examples where we have either in North Carolina or also in Europe, in Denmark, different types of industrial symbiosis areas that have been set up between multiple larger corporations, where they try to share already any of the energy generating procedural steps, right? So where they generate energy out of the process, and the others, or even themselves, they can use that energy for heating the building, or in other ways using that energy in someone else's production process, right? So these are those areas in the value chain that we need to find, and they can generate revenue and shared value for everyone in the process. So this way it can be linked back into, how we economize and how we generate money out of the value chain processes. So that's where I usually say, simply just saying that we need to increase the prices to come up with sustainable products, or making them sustainable, it's I would call it a little bit in a cheeky way, the lazy approach. Of course, we can do that, but equally, from a supply chain professional perspective, I would call on this community's strength, and one of the key strengths of the majority of supply chain professionals is really being resourceful, and hugely resourceful. And that's where I would say, we need to get back to using everyone's shared knowledge and build that up in the organizations, and then they can be really sustainably profitable on the long term.
Definitely. I definitely think that partnerships are, very important in the sense of becoming circular and figuring out how you can work together because, like we talked about before, sharing knowledge is so important. It's not something, as we work towards a more sustainable circular economy as a whole, knowledge sharing is almost crucial. And I think, I would like to ask you, what do you think the most important steps to move toward a circular economy are? Going off of that, for us at ISCEA, we always, say education is very important. And first off, and I don't know for you, what do you think? Is it stepping back and looking at all of the individual supply chains that make up the economy and, doing an audit and seeing where we can become more circular, or is it implementing education, for all professionals? Like what, in your opinion, would be the most significant step to working towards that circular economy? And maybe there isn't just one. I don't think there is, but off the top of your head, what do you think if we could, have everyone operating in the economy do one thing, what would that thing be?
Again, an amazing question. I would say you're upfront right here. Let's start with that. There is no single, magic wand answer here. But I would say if I really had to choose one single thing to start with, that would be really industry-wide education, and that will remarkably pave the way, for all the rest of the action. The more supply chain professionals have, sustainability education, the more they will implement even the small steps in their daily work, right? And that's where the miracle will happen. And as we usually say, and I heard you even saying that before, and others at the sustainability pledge day as well, that small steps bring big results together. So the more of us do even just a little bit in our daily lives, it counts, right? So for me, really, education is the first thing, and then of course we can take a look at audit of the supply chains and the individual value chains. But really, the educational part is where we're gonna gain the biggest value out of the many elements we could do.
Definitely, I agree with you on that. And I think it's important to clarify here that also, as we move towards a circular economy, it's not just the education of the supply chain, roles. It's
Mhm.
we really need to educate everyone involved along the value chain, whether that be the engineers, the product development team, everything from start to finish, because the supply chain, like we said, there's so much more than that in the economy. So we really need to make sure that it's not just supply chain professionals being educated at, whatever, large corporations, smaller, middle size, any size. It's all roles. And that's what I think is so important, that it's going to be a shift, but something that would be necessary if we truly want to attain that circular economy.
Absolutely, can only agree there. I mean, all of the businesses themselves, right? As you phrase it so right, they are kind of just like a biological person, basically our own self. We live in symbiosis with the different parts of ourselves, right? So the different elements, and this is the same for any business. So if we just educate the supply chain community, then we leave the rest behind and nothing will ever happen. So you're so right. Everybody needs to get the same quality and level of education in sustainability and circular economy principles, and that will lead us to get the change that we really need to take.
Definitely. And I guess, before we wrap up, I think I have one more question that I would like to hear your opinion on. As a supply chain advisor, I think you definitely get to work with some of the value chains and helping people shift their approach to supply chain. So, lastly, why do you think a total value approach is important in sustainability? And, how do you include that in your supply chain advising?
It's a really long answer, but I try to be as short as possible here. So a
Mhm.
total value approach for me symbolizes and embodies, that critical mindset that we need to change. So for me, during my 20 odd years experience, supply chain and all the value chain practitioners and leaders have moved, from a very efficiency and cost driven environment to a optimization driven environment, and where we still try to drive everything via efficiency and cost, and the bottom line for the businesses were so critical that in many ways um, we forgo and we forgot about what is the total value along our value chain, right? And sometimes I'm sure even you yourself, being younger than me, but I'm sure you've seen as well, and then many of my peers can confirm that this practice or these different practices that we're focusing on either individual P&L lines or just a cost element, they brought a couple of controversial, results, and in some cases even negative results for the companies. Not necessarily, downright negative, but they did not reach, the desired impact that the companies were striving for. So for me, to change, the mindset to a total value impact approach, where we really take every single element of that impact into consideration from a social perspective, ecological and economical perspective. It would be critical to ensure that we make the right decision, right, when we set up value chains. I can give you a good example here where I really find it's important. So for instance, when someone offshores a set of processes, and then, well, during the pandemic, we realized that maybe it wasn't, the best thing to do for many reasons. Then I would say, before uprooting that offshore operation, we need to look at what the impact would be on that local community where we engage the people, right, before moving that. And of course, it would have been the right approach before, when we moved, operations away from US or Europe as such. So looking back, on the whole process retrospectively, it would have been a different approach even back then. But I think it's clear to see when we take a look at, just a total cost or total efficiency process versus a total value process, how much more everyone can get out of that approach, right? So for me, at least, it's clear, and then I try to clarify this with all of the companies and organizations I work with, how much, they can, how much more value they can create. Let's put it this way. So some of the values that were there all along the time that we didn't think of before, it's still there. Now we just need to make sure that we actually look at them and we realize that there's value in taking a look at it from a social, ecological, and economical perspective.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for your expertise in coming on here today and talking with me about this. Your work is phenomenal, and it's great to know that there are supply chain advisors like you out there, leading this movement towards more sustainable supply chain practices. Everything you've touched upon, resonates so deeply with what we're doing at ISCEA, and it really is a pleasure to get to talk to you again. I know, we have previously met on supply chain, sustainable pledge day, but more than that, let's continue the conversation. It doesn't just have to, stop after today. As we move towards a more circular economy, I think in time it will be very interesting to, talk again, maybe in a year or 6 months from now about these same topics and see the progress that we've made and, if there has been significant shifts. But I want to thank you again for your time today, and I look forward to speaking with you in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Madison. And thank you for ISCEA as well for making this happen. I really welcome, a series of podcasts. It's really important to spread the knowledge as we discussed. And I just wanted to say from my end, being a bit from the older generation, I just love to see, how many of the younger generation, including you, have started immense work on sustainability and circular economy, and please keep up the good work. And I really look forward to a regular catch up and seeing all of you, shifting a lot of mountains, let's put it this way. You're gonna do that and we're gonna do that together, but it's really amazing to see. So I love to see that, and thank you so much again for this discussion, and we'll keep in touch for sure.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you too. Have a lovely evening.
You as well.